It's gonna go a second. This is Dr. Joseph Martin, and the lives of Tecumseh, or actually Tecumseh, as we say, that's his proper name, and his younger brother Tenskwatawa are the topics for our discussion today. The subtitle is Re-Indigenizing the One Circle of All Peoples. I want to say before we start that history is never finished, and history isn't true just because the people who are the victors put a spin on it and bring their lies and their values and their attitudes to control and dominate another group of people. Of course, this has been done in the history of all humanity, but there is a higher law of karma, there is a higher law of truth and justice, and a higher reconciliation that does take place over time in space, in the same space over time as the centuries roll forward. This is the true way to look at spiritual history, not the spin doctoring that's been done by those who are the victors. Such a comment needs to be said in all the cases of the indigenous peoples of the world and their colonization, but let's just take this one example today of Tecumseh and his younger brother, Tenskwatawa. Tecumseh was born in 1768 and he went into spirit in 1813. His name, Tecumseh, means shooting star or panther in the sky. Had he been born at a different time and place when we weren't in a dying civilization, he would have been as great a leader as Alexander the Great. In fact, many people make the references to him in that way. Not only is he a great military leader and tactician and strategist, but he was a consummate diplomat and loyal, trustworthy kind of leader and teacher. He was always one to try to make amends with people and try to work out situations before they got out of hand. He is a Shawnee Indian and was born in the area of Ohio. His mother died when he was quite young, and he was always involved in experiences, events day by day, when the white frontiersmen and women were moving westward in the 1770s and 1780s, taking over all the First Nations lands there. And in fact, they murdered his father. And his father's name, and I do want to give reference to him here, is Pukshinwa. Pukshinwa was his murdered father's name. When his father was murdered, of course, he was homeless. So his older brother, Chisikau, was the one who raised he and Tenskwatawa, and also there was a sister there as well, and taught him the ways of war and the truth and rights and justice of the First Nations people. He traveled with his brothers to the Cherokee Nation. I want to give you this name as well. This is quite important here. The Chickamauga tribe of the Cherokee Nation. And there they were trying to do some diplomatic work to arrange some kind of pan-Indian Confederacy whereby all the First Nations, who had been not warring but certainly not completely friendly, come together in a novel new way for the first time in history to try to defeat or resolve some of these issues with the growing American kind of groups of people that were just killing all their people and taking over their land and natural resources. Many of these kind of diplomatic détentes never worked. They felt they couldn't deal with people with twisted minds and forked tongues and dark hearts or no hearts. So there was just no dealing with people like this. So they kept moving further and further west into different territories as the white people encroached on their territories and killed all the native men, women, and children, and stole their livestock and so on and their farmlands. And they ended up in a territory with the Miami First Nation out in Indiana. And this is where In 1808, Tenskwatawa and Tecumseh built their Prophetstown, as it's called, where they accepted people from all First Nations and tried to make a last stand there to stop the encroachment of the Western hegemony and kind of steamrolling of all the white people that were coming through and just terrorizing and tearing down all the First Nations peoples and culture. Tenskwatawa had taken on this name. It is a name that means open door. And he had an open heart, an open door. He was quite a mystic and visionary and a prophet, obviously. That's why we call it Prophetstown, whereby he had a vision that if all the First Nations, not just the Shawnee, but all the First Nations of Turtle Island were to give up the liquor and the clothing of the white people and to give up the white kind of ways in terms of their education and certainly their religion, which was destroying the First Nations Indigenous honest heart connection with the Creator, that they could make a stand and they could defeat the white people and retain and regain their lands, their culture, their language, and their peoples. This was admirable, but like 60 years later, Sitting Bull with the ghost dance, it didn't seem to work in the long run. It certainly did in the short run. There were people, First Nations chiefs and leaders and elders and medicine women from all over the First Nations of all of Turtle Island who came to hear Tenskwatawa with his prophecies and visions of what would happen. Part of the vision was that they needed to make a pan-Indian cultural movement that would be obviously needing to be protecting their people and the land through warfare. Tecumseh, being the older brother and the leader, actually did do this. He created a confederacy in the early 1800s for all the First Nations of the Southern Great Lakes. That includes all of the Anishinaabe and the Algonquian and the Nipissing and many, many others as well. And during the American not the Civil War, but the American Revolution, when they were fighting for their independence, the Shawnee and his Pan-American Indian movement aligned with Tecumseh and with the British Empire and the British in Canada. And of course, there were other peoples, different kinds of tribes that allied with the Americans. But mostly in this case, it was the American military and the militia who were searching down and hunting and killing as many First Nations as they could. It was kind of a sport, in fact, for them. There's so much we can say about this. I just want to give you a flavor for it all, and the fact that some visions remain alive throughout time and space, and they still will be manifest at some point in the future in Earth history. Certainly it's the case around the world, and it's certainly the case here in Turtle Island. The fall of Fort Detroit happened in the War of 1812, in the year 1812, when the military people, the Americans who held Fort Detroit, had been killing natives for quite a while to get the rights and the passageways for all the beaver trade, pelt trade, and so on, and all the other westward movements from the Great Lakes. However, Tecumseh and his Pan-Indian group of men and women were able to kill and burn the people in Detroit in sort of recompense for all the death and illness been brought by smallpox and firearms and warfare for ever so long. It's an interesting thing that karma, this is another little aside here, karma always resides in a particular space and place, and it's interesting 100 years later now what's happening with the city of Detroit. It's probably the poorest and the most depressed and emotionally oppressive place to be, and I have lived there and done some study there. Now, in 1813, there was a final battle about to be held in southern Ontario today, it's called that, near the Thames River in a place called Moraviantown. And Tecumseh and all his warriors who were left that were supporting the British Major General Commander, Proctor is his name, or was his name, and he was kind of a lily-hearted, kind of a fearful kind of a chap, and who knows how he ever got to be commander. This is all in the history books, and I highly suggest the one best book to read is John Sugden's, Sugden, book called Tecumseh, A Life. I read over 40 books and articles on Tecumseh. This is by far the best and the most realistic and true. Tecumseh made this statement to Commander Proctor just before he hightailed it back to what is now Toronto. He said, look, you're not willing to fight. You're afraid of the Americans who are coming for our final battle in the War of 1812. And you know what? This is October 1813. Just give us the guns that were promised to us by the British king, and we will fight for you in your place. And his last comments to Proctor before he hightailed it away from the battle were, you know what, we know what our vision is and we know what our purpose is. And if we need to leave our bones lying here baking in the sun on this land, we will do so, and we are happy to do so. Well, in fact, that was a premonition of what was to happen, for Tecumseh was killed in that battle. We don't know exactly where his bones were taken. We know that our First Nations people still have his bones, but you can go, as I have done, to Moravian Town in southern Ontario and find the place where the battle took place. Now, I feel it's important for me to say at least this much to you about Tecumseh and my relationship with him. I have been speaking to Tecumseh as a friend since I was a young boy of 6, 7, 8 years of age. He's part of my daily life and existence. He's one of my closest friends. I speak to him all the time. We have an open line of communication between me here in physical and Tecumseh in the spirit world. We've been friends seemingly forever. We have a lot of interconnections. We have a lot of knowledge and wisdom we share. Some of the true stories of his real history I do know about and may put out forward at some further time in the future. What I'd like to suggest is two things. We in Canada and America should be much more respectful to the First Nations and all they've gifted us with. In fact, southern Ontario today would be in American hands if it wasn't for Tecumseh and his band of Indian people. The Americans would have taken the land, and so we can at least be grateful for that. You know, the First Nations have never been idle. They've always been loyal and trusting and supportive of all the white peoples who've come here to invade their territories and take over. So, you know, the lack of respect and kindness that Canadians and Americans today show towards the First Nations really is illegitimate and wrong-headed and wrong-hearted, and it has no bearing at all to the projections of white people's shadows on people who they deem to be inferior, but in fact are just equals. And so this might be a good lesson to take something to heart about Tecumseh, and in fact all the First Nations leaders and elders and peoples today living, and support them as one nation, one culture. And the second point I'd like to close with is this, that the visions and the prophecies of all our ancient peoples, and I do mean here now our First Nations, include myself here on Turtle Island, the ancient prophecies, some of them thousands of years old, way before the white people ever got here, and the more modern prophecies, even from 200 years ago, say from Tenskwatawa. These prophecies live in time and through time and beyond time and space. They live as realities in the dimensions of the fourth and fifth and other dimensions. They become internalized realities and kind of truth-seeking, truth-speaking, and energy fields, morphogenetic energy fields, if you like, that impulse and open the heart and open the doors to truth and reality and justice, human justice, social justice. That prophecy of Tenskwatawa is still alive today, as are all the other prophecies. And it will be manifest no matter how long it takes. You know, Tecumseh said many times, one of his favorite sayings is, I feel I am a great fire consuming all the dark souls that have come to us. And that suggests that, you know, the dark souls will always create a dark generation in times, and also a dying civilization, as we now experience America and Canada to be. There's no question, it's just one of many cycles of civilizations that come and go and come and go. Only when there's justice will civilization be completed and be sustained. The dark souls, and we all have a dark part of us inside, don't we, can choose to redeem ourselves and come together in a new light, in a new circle. One heart, one mind, one drum, one people. This prophecy, this vision of Tenskwatawa and Tecumseh for one new world together, a new consciousness, a new life, can be a reality only when each of us in our hearts make it so, come together in the one circle, one heart, one mind, one drum, one people, all peoples, the re-indigenization of our hearts, our consciousness, our culture, and all the earth. Skane Goa, all blessings, the peace is great. Prophecies are being fulfilled daily. Miracles do happen when we make our hearts open doors to all that is and to all our relations. All love and blessings.